October 732. A man with no royal blood, no title, and no legal right to be standing where he is, looks out across a field in northern France at the most battle-hardened cavalry force in the known world. They have not lost a major engagement in a century. They swept through Persia, through Egypt, through North Africa, through Spain. They burned Bordeaux 6 months ago and left nothing standing. The Duke of Aquitaine, a man who spent years trying to destroy the figure now standing beside him, rode north on his knees to beg for help. And the man he begged is not a king. He is not even supposed to exist. He was cut out of his father's will, thrown in a prison cell and left to rot, but he escaped. And then he spent 17 years turning Francia into a weapon. His name is Charles. And when the cavalry charges, he does not move. To understand what Charles is doing on that field, you need to understand what Europe looks like in the early 700s. The Roman Empire is gone. What is left in the West is rubble, dressed up as kingdoms. The Frankish realm, the territory that will one day become France and Germany, is theoretically ruled by the Merovingian kings. In practice, the Merovingians have been ceremonial furniture for generations. The real power sits with the mayor of the palace, not a mayor in any modern sense. Think chief of staff, warlord and treasurer combined. The man who controls the army and the land controls everything. Charles's father, Pepin of Herstal, held that position. He had united the Frankish realm by force and held it together for decades. When he died in 714, he left 3 grandsons as heirs and his wife Plectrude as regent. He did not leave anything to Charles. Charles was illegitimate, born of a concubine, not a wife, and in 8th century Francia that meant you were legally invisible. Plectrude made sure of it. The moment Pepin died, she had Charles arrested and locked in a cell in Cologne. An insurance policy, a loose end tied off. She miscalculated. Charles escaped within a year. The sources do not agree on how. What they agree on is what happened next. He went straight to the Austrasian nobles, the lords of the eastern Frankish territories, who had watched Plectrude hand power to an 8-year-old child and decided they wanted no part of it. They proclaimed Charles their mayor on the spot. He had no treasury, no established army, no institutional backing. His first major engagement against the Neustrian forces allied with Plectrude he lost. Outnumbered, outpositioned, driven from the field into the forests east of the Rhine with the men he had left. He spent that winter in the trees. No palace, no supply line, no reinforcements coming. Just Charles and a shrinking group of Austrasian fighters who had bet everything on a man with no legal claim to anything in a forest in winter after a defeat. He used the time. He drilled the men he had. He studied what had broken at Cologne, where the line collapsed, where the cavalry had found the gap, what a reformed formation would need to look like to close it. He was not waiting out the winter. He was building the answer to it. 12 months later, he came back. Hit the Neustrians at Vincy before they were ready. They broke. He pursued. He did not stop. That is the pattern that defines the next 17 years. Every setback is a lesson. Every lesson becomes the next victory. He beats the Neustrians twice more, takes Cologne, scatters Plectrude's supporters, and is proclaimed mayor of the entire Frankish realm before he is 30. Then he turns outward. Saxons to the east, Alamanni to the south, Frisians to the north, Bavarians on the border. He campaigns in our direction simultaneously, not waiting for threats to arrive, but riding out to meet them before they consolidate. The lords who submit are left in place. The lords who resist are removed and replaced with men who answer to Charles. By the late 720s, the Frankish realm has doubled in size, and every border chief from the Rhine to the Pyrenees knows his name. But Charles is watching something else. To the south, the Umayyad Caliphate has been moving north for 20 years. Spain fell in 711. By 725, Muslim raiding forces have reached the Rhone Valley, deep inside Gaul. Charles understands what this means before most of his contemporaries do. You cannot hold off heavy cavalry with a seasonal militia. A farmer handed a spear in spring and sent home at harvest is not a soldier. He is a casualty waiting to happen. So Charles does something that nearly gets him excommunicated. He seizes church land, consecrated property, endowments, estates, and uses it to fund a standing professional army. Year-round soldiers, men who train together, campaign together, eat together. The bishops are furious. Charles does not particularly care. He is building something no Frankish ruler has had before, an infantry corps that can withstand anything. He is building it for a specific purpose. And in 732, the purpose arrives. al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi is the governor of Al-Andalus and one of the most capable commanders the Umayyad Caliphate has produced. He has spent his career doing to armies what Charles has spent his career doing to border lords, finding them before they are ready and destroying them completely. He crosses the Pyrenees in the spring of 732 with a force of heavy cavalry that has not been stopped by anything Europe has put in front of it. Duke Odo of Aquitaine had one of the larger Frankish armies outside of Charles's own forces. al-Rahman met him at the river Garonne and reduced it to nothing. One chronicle simply reads, "God alone knows the number of the slain." He sacks Bordeaux, he burns what Odo built, he turns north toward Tours, drawn by the wealth of the Basilica of St. Martin, one of the richest religious sites in Western Christendom. There is no force left between him and it, except that Odo is now riding north to the man who beat him, begging for help. Charles agrees. He marches south. al-Rahman receives intelligence that a Frankish force is moving to intercept him. He turns back from Tours toward Poitiers, looking for ground that favors his cavalry. As Charles does not give it to him. He moves his army into elevated terrain near the forests between Tours and Poitiers, where the trees break the open ground and cavalry cannot build a full charge. He positions his men on a hill, and then he waits. For 7 days, the two armies watch each other. al-Rahman sends probing attacks. Charles does not take the bait. He wants the Umayyad cavalry coming uphill, into broken ground, into a wall of Frankish infantry that has been training for exactly this moment. al-Rahman is an experienced commander. He knows what Charles is doing. But winter is coming. His men are cavalry, not built for prolonged encampment. And the longer this drags out, the worse his position becomes. On the 7th day, he charges. The Mozarabic chronicle, written 20 years after the battle, describes the Frankish formation like this. Mention of battle say, "The northern peoples remained as immobile as a wall, hoed together like a glacier in the cold regions. The Umayyad cavalry hits the Frankish square and does not break it. They charge again. They penetrate the formation in places. Arab sources confirm this, but the Franks close ranks and hold. Hour after hour, wave after wave, the most battle-proven cavalry in the world cannot crack a wall of trained Frankish infantry standing shoulder to shoulder on high ground. Then, somewhere deep in the afternoon, a rumor tears through the Umayyad ranks. The Frankish forces have gotten around behind them and are raiding their camp, looting the treasure. Everything taken from Bordeaux, from Aquitaine, from months of campaigning. Squadron after squadron peels away from the battle line to protect the camp. What starts as a controlled withdrawal becomes something else. al-Rahman rides into the breaking formation, trying to stop it. He rides directly into the Frankish infantry. He is killed. By the next morning, the Umayyad army is gone. They retreated in the night, leaving their tents, leaving much of their plunder. When Charles sends scouts at dawn, they find an empty field. What happens after Tours matters as much as the battle itself. Charles does not declare victory and go home. He spends the next 9 years hunting down every remaining Umayyad stronghold in Gaul. Narbonne, Montfrin, Arles. He drives the Umayyad forces back across the Pyrenees, piece by piece. By the time he is done, there is no Muslim military presence north of the mountain. And he does all of this without ever calling himself king. He holds no royal title. He rules the most powerful realm in Western Europe as mayor of the palace, serving a Merovingian figurehead who does exactly what Charles tells him. When the last Merovingian king dies in 737, Charles does not replace him. He rules alone, without even the pretense of a monarchy above him, until his own death in 741. He divides his realm between his sons. One of those sons, Pepin, will depose the Merovingian line entirely and make the Carolingian family the kings of Francia. Pepin's son will be Charlemagne, the man who builds the first European empire since Rome. That empire begins in a prison cell in Cologne, with a man who was not supposed to survive, let alone win. Edward Gibbon wrote that if Charles had lost at Tours, the Umayyad advance would likely have reached the Rhine. Perhaps further. The seminaries of Oxford would be teaching the interpretation of the Quran rather than the Bible. They gave him his name after Tours, Martel, the hammer. For the way he struck his enemies, the chronicles said, like iron driving through iron. No crown, no dynasty in his own name. The empire his grandson would build, the Europe that followed, none of it carries his name. But on a hill in northern France, in the autumn of 732, when the most dangerous cavalry force in the known world charged uphill into a wall of Frankish infantry and broke against it like water against stone, that was Charles, the bastard from Cologne, the man who was not supposed to be there. He was there. If you want more from the series, subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Facebook. Ash and Iron, every week.